because God tells us to learn from small things. I'm going to read from the book of Proverbs in chapter 30 again. Let me start from verse number 24. Proverbs chapter 30 verse 24. There be 4 things which are little upon the earth, but they're exceeding wise. Last week we dealt with, or in the last study rather, we dealt with verse 25 that talks about the ants, that are people that are not strong, yet they prepare their meat in summer. In verse number 26, which I want to take today, the CONIES are but a feeble folk, yet make they their houses in the rocks. The CONIES are a feeble folk. In other words, they're weaklings. They are not strong. They are not even as smart, so to say. They are feeble in their operation. Any strong animal could step on the CONIES and they're gone. But yet they make their houses in the rock. And that's a beautiful thing. So God is telling us that we should learn from them, that they are exceeding wise. And if God tells us to learn from something and that thing is wise, it means that we need to give attention to what God is saying, the all-wise God. What are CONIES? CONIES are a species of animals that are in the family of rabbits. They are not like the regular rabbits, but they are peculiar. In the Bible, they are referred to as unclean animals. In other words, don't eat them. And that's also important because it tells us not to eat them, but it tells us that they are very wise. And we have to learn a lesson from their wisdom. Anything that God tells us that we should learn from, we have to dig in our ears, open our hearts to learn from them. And there are a few things I want us to consider today about the CONIES. Because when we lack the wisdom of the CONIES, a lot of things will go wrong. The CONIES are a feeble folk, yet make they their houses in the rocks. They are feeble, yet make they their houses in the rocks. In other words, the CONIES realize that they are feeble, and so they don't have to be in the places where other creatures are, so that no one will take advantage of their feebleness and trample them under. That is very important. So 2 things that we're going to just look at briefly is, number 1, their peculiar trait, and number 2, the powerful trait that they have. When we talk about power, the mind of people goes to the exertion of energy sometimes. But sometimes even the weak things have their own power. These CONIES make their houses in the rocks. That is power itself. Let's start from the first thought. The peculiar trait of the CONIES is that they have the ability to protect themselves. And that's one of the lessons that we can learn from the CONIES. CONIES are able to protect themselves from predators. Protecting yourself. That's one of the very vital lessons that God wants us to learn. One of the reasons why you see that there is a lot of wastage in the society, in the lives of people, is because they have not learned to protect themselves. The CONIES realize that they are feeble. And because they are feeble, they can be prey to predators easily. And so they decided to protect themselves from predators. And you must understand that just gives us 1 Peter 5 verse 8 as a reference. Be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. That means that if you don't protect yourself from the adversary, he will devour you. And this is where the CONIES have the wisdom that we need to learn. First, anybody that wants to live victoriously in this world must learn to protect himself from predators. There is nobody that is a superman in this world. Everybody have the places of their vulnerability. There's a places that you can become vulnerable to the enemy that seeks your life. And you must learn to protect yourself. And especially as a young person, you must recognize those places early enough to be able to protect yourself. Because the enemy, like I've said over and over in previous times, the enemy is not going to come against your strength. He has enough sense to know that if he comes against your strength, it will destroy him. So he has to go against your weakness. And it is through your weakness that he gets your strength. And so the CONIES realize that, look, we are feeble folks. So if we try to live the normal everyday life among the other creatures, we become vulnerable. And that was the reason why they developed this wisdom. In other words, let me put it this way, that God gave them this wisdom. And if God gives you wisdom, you must use it. If he gives you a knowledge you don't use, then it means that you become foolish. Like we said before, when God said, go to the ant, you sluggard and learn. Sluggishness is not a want of strength, but it's because one does not use the knowledge he has to advantage. And the same thing, when we look at the CONIES were given knowledge and they used it to advantage, it became wisdom. That's why they are referred to as wise. So, firstly, you have to recognize that everyone have a peculiar trait. You have your peculiar trait. And your power is in that peculiar trait. Recognize it. The ability to protect yourself depends on recognizing those peculiar traits that God has given to you. Firstly, therefore you have to recognize or identify your peculiar trait. What is your peculiar trait? Some people know how to talk. In fact, their voice is their power. And the greatest power that a human being has on the face of the earth is the power of the human voice. Some people know how to talk. Some people have the ability to manage things. They are born with it. It is a part of them. They are gifted with it. Some people, I know some people that if you give them money, just mark the money, hand it over to them. 6 months time, come back to them, they will give that money with the same marks. There are some people, if you give them a little money to survive, other people may be starving, they'll survive. I have seen people working in companies. Their bosses that earn more than them will come to them to ask them for money. I'm trying to talk about peculiar graces that God has given to us. There are traits that we have that God has given because we have not learned. I'll be dealing with that later. Because we have not learned to surrender them to God, we do not know that they are the source of our power. They are the habitat of our power. There is power inherent in those peculiar traits. These creatures, these CONIES that are feeble, have peculiar traits. Firstly, recognize your human endowments, your spiritual endowments. First, you have talents. Talents and gifts are not the same thing, but recognize your talents. What you need to do is to surrender your talents to God. And secondly, you have gifts of God's grace. Recognize those giftings that God has given to you. Your power lies in them. That is the source of your power to protect yourself. You protect yourself from predators by the endowments that God has given to you, your talents and your gifts that God has given to you. Now, these CONIES have sharp hoofs. And these sharp hoofs enable them to hop like squirrels so that they can climb to the top, the cleft of the rock. Now, you don't find CONIES just anywhere. You find them among rocks. They live in holes of the rocks or the clefts of the rock. They climb to those heights. And there is one thing about it. Usually, rabbits are a prey. If you notice, lions tigers, many of these predating animals, they don't pursue things like rabbits. But the creatures that feed on rabbits easily are snakes. But there is a uniqueness that it is very difficult for hunters to catch conies because their hooves enable them to jump, just like they are not squirrels, but they will jump from one rock to the other like squirrels. In fact, they are hardly caught by hunters. Even though snakes crawl and try to catch rabbits ordinarily, the conies make it impossible for them to catch them. And one of the things about snakes probably you've not known is that the higher you go, the more powerless a snake becomes. Snakes don't like heights. If you put a snake, the most powerful snake, put it in an aircraft, as the aircraft flies higher, the snake becomes powerless. You can hold the snake. It will not be able to do harm. Because heights are a threat to snakes. It immobilizes them, makes them powerless. And that means that conies win the battle over predators by the heights that they climb. They're able to protect themselves because of the heights that they climb in. So the ability to up like squirrels, live in holes, live at the clefts of the rock, makes it impossible for their predators predators to conquer them. And you have to therefore learn to protect yourself. And that is a lesson you can learn from conies. Learn to protect yourself with the endowments that God has given to you. Firstly is the power of your endowments. There is a hidden power in the endowments of man. Proverbs 18 tells us, a man's gift maketh room for him. Those endowments you have got, whether they are talents or your spiritual giftings, they enable you to protect yourself, protect your job, protect your family, protect your relationship, protect your connections, protect your academics, protect your degrees. Some people have good certificates, but because they are not using the endowments that they have, they are not able to protect themselves from falling and failure. Sometimes if people are flushed out of work, you see them, they're walking on the street searching for job because they don't recognize the endowments that God has given to them. Ministers sometimes, as a young minister, if you're a minister of the gospel, you're a young person, you have to recognize your endowments. I know that sometimes we look at this pastor and look at the other man of God and look at the other woman of God, but there are endowments that you have which you need to recognize. And when you recognize that, it will protect you from your predator. The Bible tells us your adversary, the devil, roars about like a lion, seeking for whom he may devour. You discover that because of your endowments, he won't be able to devour you. That is the peculiar trait that God has given to you. It makes you distinct. It makes you stand different from every other person. And the other thing is that you don't have to expose yourself to your enemy. So there is a problem of exposure. Conies don't expose themselves to the enemies. They understand the areas that they can become vulnerable, so they don't expose themselves. You see, the birds, it would be stupid of a bird to try to come into the water and try to swim like a fish. As it would be the most idiotic thing for the fish to do to boast of swimming on the ground. The lion can be king of the jungle, but not king of the sea. You must know the places where your strength lies. And don't expose yourself to the enemy in the places where your weaknesses lie. What was Samson's problem? Samson did not understand the area that he was vulnerable. Delilah took advantage of him because of his love. He didn't realize that as a man he could love, and because he loves, he could go to the extreme because of love. And Delilah saw that and took advantage of it. And let me say this to you. Every one of us have the area that we are vulnerable. And you must recognize and protect yourself. That's the way to protect yourself from predators. Your enemy will not come against your strength. It will come against your weakness. There are things you don't like naturally. Don't think because you're a child of God, you may like them naturally. You can pray them away. Let me just give you an instance. Some people like things organized naturally. They're born with it. It's a part of them. They want everything arranged. Don't think that because you're a child of God, you pray, and it may be your spouse or your loved one, people that are living around you are just doing things upside down, that you will like it. You may not like it, but you have to be able to protect yourself so that you don't fall prey. There are some people, especially young people, you'll notice that you like to walk with the opposite sex. Some boys like to walk with girls. Some girls like to walk with boys. You have to understand your vulnerability. If you don't protect yourself, you become a prey. That is where your temptations may be coming from without you knowing. It may not even be that you are falling into sexual sins, but you see that your problem is connected with problems of the opposite sex. And even when you're married, that is where your problem will be coming from. I've seen relationships being damaged because of women that are flocking around a man. I've seen relationships destroyed because of men that are flocking around a woman. There are some men, the moment they are going, they don't need to even look at the woman twice. The woman is ready for them. You have to understand the areas of your vulnerability. Sometimes they can call it demons, evil spirits. It is not everything that is a demon. There are things that you have to understand yourself. The CONIES are feeble, but they make their houses in rocks so that the predator will not be able to get to them, because they are in a place where they cannot get to. Lions don't seek for prey on top of the rock. Tigers don't seek for prey on top of the rock. They know where to seek for their prey. Snakes will not climb to that height to seek for prey. So the CONIES are wise. Protect yourself. God bless you. Father, Lord, I pray for whoever is listening. 2021 is rolling.